Thank you for all coming. We gather here once a month for our Lunch and Learn series, and this is our opportunity to be with like-minded folks like you who are interested in justice and social justice issues. So we love seeing familiar faces. So many of you are regulars with us now. I guess you're our Friday afternoon groupies, I think. If you're here for the first time, please raise your hand. There's a couple people. Yes, yes, yes. So welcome, welcome. And I see members who are here. Let's see your hands raised. IHMs, yes. Very good. Okay, so let's get to know each other today. I always want to give a little bit of an infomercial about our community because many of the people know our history, but kind of not where we are today. You can guess from our name, Immaculate Heart Community, that we have our roots in a Catholic order of nuns. And that changed in the 1970s when we became a lay community, a community without walls. And today we are a Christian-based, inclusive, ecumenical community of men, women, gay, straight, married, single. We live all over the continental United States and Canada. And next weekend, we're going to be inviting having a new member coming in from England who's going to be making her commitment with us. So we're becoming worldwide at this point. We do accept new members annually, so if you're interested in membership, please let us know. And check out our website for upcoming events and more of our history. So one of the objectives of our Lunch and Learn series is to implement our goal statement. And I really like to read this every time we get together because it really, I think, anchors our session and why we're here. So we say our goal statement calls us to build relations in society which foster access for all persons to truth, dignity, and full human development, and to strategically change practices and situations which impede such access. So this regular meeting on once a month in our Lunch and Learn series gives us the opportunity to begin to form those relationships with people like you and build partnerships. So thank you for being here and being a part of that. We also remind people who come to our series that we have a 3-step process that we like to go through when we are dealing with justice and social justice issues. First, we seek to educate ourselves, and that's why we're here today. Second, we engage in prayer around these issues, and we invite all of you to do the same thing within your own faith tradition. We think that that's one thing that makes us stand apart, maybe for some other groups who are working in similar causes. And thirdly, as a result of this session today, we ask you to think about what action you might take. So yes, educate, pray, but then put your faith into action. Think about one thing that you could do, one thing that you can act on based on what you're going to hear from Megan and Andy. So now I have the absolute great pleasure of introducing Megan Kerr and Andy Kerr, who are IHM members and have been for a long time. And Megan's parents were IHM members, and Jane is here today. Where are you, Jane? There you are. Okay. So we are proud to claim Andy and Megan as our own because they both exemplify our belief in terms of putting faith into action and serving those in need. So Andy has been a dedicated and passionate supporter of nonprofits and housing service providers throughout his career. In 2002, he joined with other IHC members, many of who are in this room today, to found Housing Works. Housing Works is a visionary nonprofit known for its Housing First model. Housing Works provides supportive housing services to chronically homeless individuals and families throughout LA County. And Andy has served as treasurer, financial officer, and vice chair for the Housing Works Board of Directors. In 2014, he was appointed to the City of Long Beach's Homeless Services Advisory Committee and helped oversee the city's Homeless Services Division in the Department of Health. In 2016, he was appointed by Mayor Robert Garcia to serve on his Affordable and Workforce Housing Study Group in Long Beach. This group is responsible for recommending policy and administrative changes to the mayor and the Long Beach City Council. They are spearheading County Measure A, which is currently on the ballot for November 5th, and they will talk to us about that today. And Andy just shared with me that he's in a new job as of 4 weeks as the CFO at Cal State Long Beach, in charge of student auxiliary enterprises. I think I got that right. So good luck to you in that new job. Okay, it's a mouthful, yeah. And then there's Megan. Megan has been devoted to civic improvement through her whole career. She serves on the board of the California Conference for Equality and Justice. She's a highly respected leader. She was elected to the Long Beach Unified School District School Board in 2014, where she was recognized for supporting community-based literacy programs for North Long Beach students and her advocacy for LGBTQ youth. After having served 2 terms on the school board, she was sworn into office in 2022 as Long Beach's 5th District Councilwoman. She continues to bring her leadership, work ethic, and passion for public service to the critical work of shaping a strong, sustainable future for Long Beach. So these are 2 members that we couldn't be more proud of, and we're thrilled that they're with us today. They tell me that they're going to tag team on this presentation, so I think we're in for a show and a good ride here. So please join me in welcoming Megan and Andy Kerr.
Good to be here with you all. Michelle set a high standard. I don't know if we're going to be engaging in entertainment, but we're going to try. We've been married for a long time, so it is possible. Can you hear us okay? Can you hear us okay? Like that? Right, what I didn't tell Sherry and Michelle is that we're actually a traveling production. We're a new production of The Odd Couple. He's the uncompromising affordable housing and homelessness advocate. She's strong-willed politician who isn't solving all the problems fast enough for the advocate. Can they make it work? So far, we're doing pretty good. We're trying. So it is so good to be with you today. I know that's a little loud. Let us know if this sounds okay. It feels like home. So it's so nice to see so many familiar faces. Some folks we haven't seen probably in 8 or 10 years. Pandemic dash in between that. So just a little bit before we get started on that, Andy and I met when I was in high school. We dated for a long time. We did actually meet in drama. We did meet in St. Anthony High. Any St. Anthony teachers? We met at St. Anthony drama. Weave a little bit of that story. Married in 1996. I was baptized on the floor of a house of IHMs in 1973. So I have a long connection to the IHM community, and we joined as members officially in 2002. So go ahead with. Oh, is that the pump? We'll move this direction. All right, back and forth. In our community of Long Beach, we're very entrenched in the Long Beach community, and it's kind of ironic because I think in most of our circles, people look at me as Andy's the homelessness guy, the guy that really cares about that issue and affordable housing and those sorts of things. But shortly after we started dating, it was actually Megan who really kind of centered the values of our relationship around caring passionately about the issue and just being aware of, even back in the late 1980s and early 1990s, of being aware of the unhoused community in our city of Long Beach. And Megan was the one that kind of got us started in volunteering in that area.
So briefly, we one Saturday morning went with some friends to Santa Monica to the Bluffs, where at the time, folks who were homeless, because that was how they were referred to at the time, were living, and we made sandwiches and we cooked breakfast. And Santa Monica is really far from Long Beach. And I remember on the way home, very aware of the audio, I looked at my parents and my dad specifically and said, why doesn't anybody do this in Long Beach? I was born and raised in Long Beach. Anybody who knows Long Beach knows if you go downtown by Lincoln Park then and Lincoln Park now, you will find a large unhoused community. And I said, why isn't anyone doing it in Long Beach? And he looked directly at me, as my dad would often do, and most of you know, and he said, I don't know, why aren't you? Thanks, Dad. I was 18 at the time. I think I was just finishing up high school. And that was enough. It was enough to gather friends who had similar heads and hearts around it. We went, sort of bullied our way into the pastor and said, hey, we're going to do this thing and we're going to use the hall and we need a key. And we began serving breakfast 2 Saturday mornings a month, anywhere from 150 to 400 people. We set up camp stoves, we cooked eggs and bacon, and we made sandwiches. And we did that for 8 years. Second and fourth Saturdays, police officers knew us, the community knew us. It was the thing we could do on a Saturday morning at 7:30 and pack up by 9 when the city kind of woke up and noticed that there were people around. So that sort of was our very early dating days and into getting married. And I think we had 2 kids by the time we stopped, and they would sit in the back of the truck and help pack lunches. But I think the beginning of our relationship was always based in service, which of course comes from my family and my parents, and that idea of the goal statement lived out all the time. Where are there opportunities to support, uplift, and eventually figure out ways to change the structures, which I think is kind of the arc of our story so far.
So fast forward a few years, and so I had this basis in our relationship, and not having grown up in a family like Megan. And for those of you that knew my father-in-law, Tom, that was a very typical thing for Tom to do, is to challenge us as a young dating couple in that moment to get involved in solutions. And so I had that basis in the early days of our relationship, and not having been a part of the family like that was very much attractive to wanting to root myself in something bigger than myself in our early relationship. And then we started a family, and fast forward a few years, and my comadre, Mary Kirchen, who is here, had this crazy idea of starting a new nonprofit about 20, how many years ago, Mary? 22 years, 22, 23 years ago. And so I was her partner in crime and helping, and like a lot of us in the community were involved in the first board of Housing Works, and starting to get involved in this issue that was starting to materialize of people experiencing severe housing insecurity. And so Mary was the visionary all those years ago to really recognize that as an early need in the Los Angeles community, and Housing Works has done incredible work, and it was one of the highlights of my life to be involved in that. So I did that work for many years, and that was such amazing work, because one of the things I look forward to the most is our board meetings, and we would have our caseworkers come and talk to us just about the incredible stories. Like the one story that sticks in my mind is the sisters that we worked with who were living in their car, and they just had no hope of having anything other than having to live in their car. And part of the barrier is they had a dog, I believe, or maybe it was 2 dogs, I forget. I'm sure Mary remembers the story, and that was a barrier to them being able to get housed at the time. And it was impossible to in a lot of situations to get somebody housed, and that had a furry family member, and people not realizing that especially people experiencing homelessness have been they've been so disappointed by so many of the people in their lives, and then they have a furry friend, a dog or a cat or whatever it is somebody that just loves them unconditionally, and they're like a family member, and people will choose to not be housed if it's a choice between giving up on their family member. And so Housing Works, we took that on, and we got them housed and got their dog housed with them. And I just remember being touched by those types of stories in Housing Works.
And while Andy was, with Housing Works, and we were raising our own family, I got to join the board of Alexandria House, which is transitional housing for women and children coming out of out of homelessness, out of domestic violence situations, or human trafficking situations. So while he's hearing stories of individual folks unhoused, I'm seeing stories of families and women and men and teenagers who have had a horrific trajectory. And it's a different kind of homeless and housing, and it's transitional housing, but what's next for them? Because they've been here for 18 months, but there's nowhere for them to go. We got them from this emergency place into a safe place. And so we were learning different sides of the issue by the involvement of the organizations that we were a part of.
And then I quickly got involved in the financial management of how do you pay for this new work that we were really on the front line of coming up with the best practices around getting people who are experiencing chronic homelessness into a better situation, into a situation of being housed. And it's not about just warehousing people without means. It's about very intentional work of housing first, the housing first strategies, where we're talking about those types of things. Harmless strategies of, you accept people where they are, get them housed first, and then work on whatever issues they are, whether it's treatment issues, whether it's psychological issues, psychiatric issues, whatever it is, you get them housed first, because you can't, anybody knows that works in the health profession, you can't make somebody better who is unsheltered and living on the street or living in the car. So housing first has got to be, and so we had Molly Lowry and Selena Alvarez, and just that incredible community that we built in Housing Works that were on the front line of coming up with all those strategies. And I was in the role of, okay, how do we pay for that, and rubber chicken dinners and just, donor relationships and all of those things, and putting together the infrastructure. So I was doing that on a very micro level, but a few things happened. Fast forward a few years, Megan got involved in running for school board, and she'll tell a little bit about that story. And I started getting involved in some political efforts at the county level of how can we make it easier for nonprofits like Housing Works to scale up the work, which is what really needed to be done to solve the problem.
So while I was on the school board, again, I saw another face of homelessness. So I saw families. Long Beach Unified is the 3rd or 4th largest school district in the state. School districts define homelessness different than our county partners. It's broader, it's bigger. If you are sleeping at your friend's house, if you're sleeping at your cousin's house, if you're couch surfing around, that's considered homeless for a child. Because again, how do they be successful academically if they're unstable in their home life? So by taking a larger approach, school districts can attach services through social workers, through resources at school as best they can. So again, that piece of it, and the school board is inherently political because it's an elected position. And when I ran as a parent, I ran as a community member, someone who had been deeply engaged in Long Beach Unified for a long time, who had no idea about the political landscape in the city. I didn't know about endorsement meetings. I didn't know about political clubs. I didn't know that there was somebody already waiting to run for this position. I was just someone who earnestly thought, someone with my experience and my background and my history in the community, and I loved it, of course I would win. So I did win, but we eked it out by 108 votes. So yes, your vote matters, 108 votes. So inherently had to learn all of those things in order to what I felt to be successful, to represent a part of the community that had been underrepresented for a long time. At one point in Long Beach Unified, before they went to districts, 3 school board members lived in the same street in Belmont Shore. And so if you know Long Beach Unified, it goes to the Compton and Paramount borders, and I was really honored to represent where we live now, but also all the way up through North Long Beach. An incredible community that I felt deserved a better voice, a different voice, someone who would call out and yell out sometimes that resources and attention needed to be paid in different parts of the city. And so I got to know a lot of people. I got to know city council people. I got to know assembly people. And that just became part of my everyday engagement as a way for me to serve my kids and families better meant I needed to know people so that sounds like my alarm that wakes me up in the morning. So, so we inherently started spending more time with people like that. And I have found that when we're with those friends, we share a deep passion for people and policy. So we talk a lot about it. One of the big criticisms that elected folks get, or that I specifically got, I'll speak to me, was, well, you're friends with them. Yeah, because We talk about the same things. We go to the same events. We support the same kinds of causes because we all care deeply about helping folks who are unhoused or working in the community. So you tend to draw people around you, as we know, that have like minds and like hearts. And so for teachers, that's a lot of teacher friends. And for me, that turned out to be a lot of really good-hearted folks who happen to be elected officials. And so we would have these dinners. This is where the advocate part comes in. So he's on his side of knowing all of the things and all of the intricate details about how the counties and cities need to do better, how they need to better allocate resources, how they need to fund them more. And if you can't fund this thing over here, if you're not going to fund this thing over here, because they'll never get over here to get the, so he knows all of those things. So we would have some pretty lively conversations with our friends, to the point where I would say, you cannot talk about housing tonight if we were going out. Yes.
Yeah, so this was about 10 years ago that she started getting involved in this world. It kind of coincided with how I was starting to get to look at things from a county-wide perspective. How do we scale up the work that Housing Works was doing? And so I really started to look at things from a higher level, where instead of hearing the stories that really formed my values and what we needed to do on a micro level with Housing Works, I started reading everything I could get a hold of and just really looking at things from an economic perspective, from a values perspective, from a policy perspective. And so it was around the time where in Long Beach we're biased. We really love our Long Beach community, but it really is a unique thing in LA County. We're a big city. We're about the size of it. We're bigger than Atlanta, or about the same size of Atlanta. Long Beach is bigger than Cincinnati. So a lot of the cities that you think of in the country, these are big cities. Long Beach, but we're just, in the shadow of this ginormous county in the city of Los Angeles. But when you really drill down in the Long Beach community, it really is a small town. When you talk about the people that grew up together, that went to school together, that are involved in all of the civic organizations, all the political, it's really this kind of small town. And so it was amazing to me, all these people that I would read about in the local paper, we just all of a sudden, she's involved in running for school board, and we know everybody all of a sudden. So it gave me an opportunity to, when allowed, to to have some of these conversations with our friends that were running for mayor, running for city council, and starting to look at things. And so I got involved in the Measure H campaign in 2016 and 2017, because a lot of us saw that as a structural solution to addressing some of these issues that we were trying to solve at the nonprofit level.
Yeah, and I think I was thinking as we were talking on the way up that when he says he reads everything, he means everything, everything. And it's amazing the amount of information he can consume and retain on this issue. And so when something very specific would come up for Long Beach, he had that perspective. He had that knowledge to write a 5-page email to local elected officials and their friends, hyperlinked. So it wasn't just like, here's what I read. It was, here's what I read and the links for all of you to go find all the information you're seeing.
You gotta have receipts.
We're big on having receipts in our family. So I was thinking that if you went back and searched your email, you would probably find, starting in 2016, 2017, sounding the alarm of, I know you don't think it's as big of an issue as it is, the unhoused situation, but it's going to get worse. And it's going to get worse because of this economics, this piece, this policy that's in place. And one of his gifts and talents is, as a money person and an economics person, is to kind of take that and forecast it. He did it for 31 years in construction and forecasting things out. He has been sounding the alarm about where we are currently, at least since 2016, 2017, and asking people over and over again to pay attention. And oftentimes they didn't. They get on board. They got on board with Measure H, which was great. But even 3 or 4 years ago, saying we need more. It needs to be more. And what can we do that's next?
And I had a lot of empathy for the people, because these were folks that didn't run on this issue. A lot of them were like, some of my friends were passionate about education, and that's what they really wanted to be, or they had these other pet projects, really important things that they were running on.
Infrastructure,
and,
all the things we need.
Yeah, infrastructure, and public safety, and just all the things that you care about in serving a local community. And I would walk up to them and I say, I know you're really focused on this. but this issue of housing and homelessness is going to get worse before it gets better. And towards the end of your tenure in this role, this is all you're going to have to deal with, because it's going to become, and they would look at me like I had three heads. I don't think many of them believe me. So that's what we've been dealing with. And part of the problem I think we're faced is the infrastructures and the government systems that we've inherited were not designed to address these problems that we're dealing with. And so it's a really big problem. In fact, the systems were designed to create the problem that we're dealing with in a lot of ways. And it's none of our generation's fault. It's the systems that we've been inheriting. And I think so it takes big solutions.
And for a long time, and for many generations, government agencies looked to religious organizations, nonprofit organizations to fill in the gaps. Catholic Charities is Catholic Charities because they were filling in the gap. So those kinds of relationships were built of, oh, we'll just have them do it. And not, I think, governments and structures looking at the ways that the decisions that they were making were contributing to it. And we can go all the way back, and we won't get started on Prop 13 and the disinvestment in building housing over the last 40 years and how that's led us to this massive housing crisis. He may get into that, but
I'll get into that. But going back to the Measure H campaign. So in 2016, 2017, there was, I think that really was kind of the beginning point where public leaders realized, okay, we're dealing with something different here. That we've always had an unsheltered population. Yes, we've always been dealing with this problem, or at least, going back to the 1970s or the 1980s. But something is happening, and we're not sure what it is. But we need to do something to solve the problem. And even for myself, as much as I saw that we were dealing with a big scale of a massive problem, I think even then I didn't quite. I think I looked at Measure H as something that would make a big difference, and I believe it has. The problem I think that happened in 2016, 2017 is we were looking at the problem as a static problem. We knew we had at that time about 45,000 folks that were experiencing unsheltered homelessness throughout the county. And so we really were targeting that number and focused on that number. And so the solution that we proposed with Measure H was really focused on that. And we've done that. We've housed that number of people. But the problem, and I realized shortly after we passed Measure H, and then I was invited to be on the Citizen Oversight Advisory Board for Measure H. I was appointed by Supervisor Hahn in 2017 to serve on that board. And the data that I started to get and look at is for every 110 people that we would get off the street and into housing, another 120 people were falling into homelessness simultaneously. So it was this dynamic problem that we weren't realizing leading up to the campaign to get Measure H passed. So that's been a big realization.
Yeah, and I think the general public, I think those of us here, again, like-minded heads and hearts and folks like Andy who've immersed themselves in it, understand how incredibly complicated this is. It is a 50-headed beast, and it is about renter protections. It's about building more. It's about keeping families sustained. It's about unsheltered folks on the street. It's trying to solve a bunch of problems at the same time. But I think one of the challenges, so I was elected to city council in 2022 after redistricting in our city. Again, it wasn't my goal at the time, but when I saw what the options were going to be, I needed someone who cared deeply about these kinds of issues to run. So that was me. That was my friends looking at me and said, why don't you? Why aren't you? So again, that call from people who you trust to make decisions you might not always make on your own. And so one of the things that I've learned, and we were talking about it on the way up, is that for the average person who sees an unhoused person, they think it's one or two or three stories. Maybe that's how they got there. Oh, maybe they lost their job. Probably they have a mental illness. Probably they have an addiction issue. And that helping to solve the problem on the big scale requires buy-in from all of us. And it requires buy-in from the people who don't always agree with us, but who we have to convince to vote for things that will help us solve the problem that we need. And so in addition to the policy work, the strategically changing practices part of that goal statement that we try and keep at the center of us all of the time is that the winning over people who don't understand why practices need to change, why structures need to change. They work just fine for them, work fine for their kids, I represent a district that I love dearly. I was born and raised in the western part of the district, and then the eastern part of the district. It's a new district after redistricting. They didn't see themselves having a lot of things in common. So part of the challenge of the last 2 years is reminding people that just because they live 4 miles down the road on the other side of the airport doesn't mean that they value things differently. We share the same values, but they don't always see the solutions in the same way. So whether that's things like after the Supreme Court and grants pass in June, having an email 15 minutes later, the Supreme Court said you can get that person out of the park. Can you please move them? To what do we, how do we continue to solve this in a comprehensive and compassionate way? So part of our dynamic when we're talking is he is policy, policy, policy. This is what we need. This is what we need. And I'm interfacing with the people that we need to convince to do those things. And those are two very different roles that we have.
And so before she was in that role, it was very easy. I'd come home at the end of the day, and over dinner, I'd be talking about all these things that I was focused on.
I would talk about school stuff and
she's
education.
talking about kids and education and what's going on at the school district, especially, and not that her job was any less hard, especially in those years in COVID. And she was on Zoom meetings with school board leaders all over the country trying to figure out what are we going to do to deal with this mess. And so, but we would have very different things, and I'd listen to her and be absorbed in what she was talking about, and I'd be talking about, well, all of a sudden now she's on the city council and very much focused on the biggest issue of the campaign. As I warned people years before, you're going to be talking about housing, you're going to be talking about homelessness. That's all that's going to take up all the oxygen in the room. And sure enough, that's what happened in her campaign. And so now she's in the thick of that issue. And I have very strong ideas on these policies and ideas. And so, but one thing I had to learn early on is she's just one of 9. She's one person in the body of 9. I think a lot of people, myself included, it's easy to put more responsibility on somebody than they really have the power to have an impact on. That it is a lot of people that make a city work, and you can even break that out between, we're a city manager led city in a lot of ways. So you could even take the elected body out of the equation, and what is the city manager doing right and not doing right? And if you don't have, and then he's got thousands of people that work for him that really make this city tick. And so there's all these components. You have to get everybody working together to solve a problem. And if you're hearing from residents 500 different issues that need to be fixed, it's really hard to prioritize and get everybody swimming in the right direction, especially on something as important as housing and homelessness.
Yeah, I think, and this is recorded for posterity, so I will remember that as I'm talking, and I will remind you to remind it as I'm going to use this example. So currently in the district that I represent, the way it is drawn, it is probably the second highest median income in the city of Long Beach.
Very different from
the school board area that I represented, where I had the country club and I had the largest housing project in LA County in my district for the school board. Now that is adjacent to the current district that I represent. And so when we talk about solving housing issues, if you go back to anything I said during the campaign, and anything most people are talking about, everybody's saying we need more housing and we need more affordable housing. And what does affordable look like? Affordable isn't necessarily just a $700 townhome. That's affordable to some folks, but what are we doing for low income, very low income, and immediately, formerly homeless folks? So I am really proud of the city of Long Beach. We're a pro-housing city. We have that designation by the state. We're leading the way in ADU production. We have the most ADUs per capita in the state of California. So Long Beach has really been looking forward at ways that we address building what we need to build. In addition to the homeless services money, partnerships with the county, opening two year-round shelters to be able to provide services to folks who are chronically unhoused or currently unhoused. But how are we looking at the spectrum of housing and what that looks like? Because we need to produce. And so in the area that I represent, an affordable housing company identified a lot that they were interested in. The city of Long Beach has its own community investment corporation, which makes decisions on purchasing properties to designate for affordable housing. The community investment corporation jumped on that, purchased that property. We found out about it right after they purchased it, so we didn't have a chance to warn our residents. And then our residents found out. It is adjacent to an historic district. On a corridor that has public transit. It scores highly in all of the things that need to score highly for affordable housing. And it's going to be a rough go. It is one of the first projects that the city is looking at doing in what the state has designated necessary, which is in high-resourced areas. Good schools, access to public transportation, parks, shops, all of those things. If you look at the map of the city of Long Beach and historically where the bulk of the affordable housing has been built over the last 10 or 15 years, you will see that it follows historical redlining patterns. And that we continue to build low-income housing in lower-income neighborhoods. And the state said that's not enough. The state has given the mandate of people need to be able to live everywhere and have access to all of the resources in all of our cities. And so Long Beach is trying with 2 projects to put in affordable housing projects in partnership with developers in high-resourced areas and higher-resourced areas. And as you can imagine, for folks who have lived there for a long time or generations or just purchased a home, that can be troubling news, that building is coming. And we talk about parking, we talk about, infrastructure needs and can we sustain it? And good-hearted people who tell me that they care about affordable housing, who care about solving the problem, are still uncomfortable when it's closer to them. And so part of the conversations that we have to have isn't just, yes, we need to build more housing, and yes, we need to build more property, and yes, we need to do things like pass funding measures that get us to do that, is to earnestly engage with people who we know knowingly disagree, sometimes angrily, sometimes mean. Yes, about what that looks like. And even having the conversation around, we have other tall buildings on that street, and they say things like, yes, but that doesn't have, and I don't know where they were going to go with that. And I stopped them. I said, families living in it? What are we going to allow ourselves to think about the neighbors that we are hopefully welcoming into this neighborhood? And if they look back 3 years, 4 years, 5 years, when this gets built, what were their neighbors saying about them before they moved in? And what they were going to have, what kind of impact did the neighbors think that their family was going to have on that neighborhood? I lived in multifamily housing. I lived in an apartment. I don't think I ruined the neighborhood. Those are hard conversations with good-hearted people who have Save Democracy signs in their yard. I've seen them. But something happens in conversations around housing that put people in a different space, and the ability to engage with them authentically. This is where one of our rubs are, and we don't get it right. And Emma has sat at a very uncomfortable dinner table every once in a while when we've gone a little too far with each other of how do I have that conversation and you're just yelling at me. It doesn't matter. We need to do it. And that is one way. Yeah. But I want to bring people with us when we do it, because we build better communities when we're all saying yes to the solution when it presents itself as an opportunity near us.
And it is frustrating to see the work of getting one affordable housing project developed, and it's comparatively it's a very modest size development in a place where I know we need to do more of that type of work in to solve this crisis. And then I'm looking at information. Oh, it's already up there. So then I'm looking at the county-wide perspective that we have to do this, that we needed to do this project 10 years ago, and we need to scale this up by a factor of, pick a number. And it's because I'm looking at information like this. This is a report that I've been reading for about 10 years. It's from the California Housing Partnership, and it's the Los Angeles County Affordable Housing Needs Assessment. And so this is really the number that keeps me up most of all at night, or a couple numbers in this report from the most current 2024 version. So, and this is kind of the key number, and this number has been around 500,000 for a while. They worded it a little differently in this report. Last year's report is that there's a deficit of about 500,000 units of subsidized affordable housing that we need right now today to solve the housing crisis for the people in most need in the county of Los Angeles. This year's report, 494,000 low-income renter households in Los Angeles County do not have access to an affordable home. And this has been a problem for a long time, and it's not going down, unfortunately. And so we're not going to solve this crisis until we get a handle on this number. This is the other number that keeps me, or some of the numbers that keep me up at night. 77% of extremely low income households in Los Angeles County are paying more than half of their income on housing costs. So, and that's a lot of those are paying, upwards of 70, 80, 90%. So what that translates to, one report that I've seen is that we have about 750,000 households in Los Angeles County that are just like one paycheck away from getting pushed into homelessness. And so that's the source of this inflow problem that we've been dealing with in programs like Measure H.
And that's part of the conversation that we have about when we are building 68, 74 units at a time that take 5 or 6 years to come online. We need it now. But when we talk about qualifications for low-income housing, again, folks who have not been in this compassionate bubble seeing the issue for a long time, something comes to mind when you say folks who qualify for affordable housing subsidies. Some of the units that that everybody's looking to build for families, that's a 2-income family that makes somewhere between, I think you have to make less than $88,000 a year for a family of 4. So knowing from the school district, I'm like, well, that's a nutrition services worker and a custodian at the local elementary school. That's some of our own city workers. Some of my staff, because of their hourly rate, would probably qualify for affordable housing subsidies. And so it's reminding people that wages haven't gone up. And so that's why this whole issue is that big multidisciplinary. It's about wages. It's about healthcare. It's about how families exist in a space. And then to say you make too much money, or not understanding that 2 folks who work at your local school or in your city are folks who qualify for affordable housing. It's just that chasm in between people who come from a long line of homeowners who maybe inherited their grandparents' house. That happens a lot in the city of Long Beach. So it's not just talking about what the numbers look like, but who those folks are who qualify and what jobs they have, because all of our communities are dependent on service workers. Long Beach is a huge hospitality, travel, tourism kind of city. So we need folks that work in hotels, that work in restaurants. We need them to be able to live close to their jobs. But what we're finding, even one of my last years on the school board, is we had 3 brand new teachers who found a house together out in Chino, Corona, somewhere really far. But the 3 of them could live in it together, and they would carpool in, and they got in a car accident on the way. They were fine on the very first day of school. But the story for most teachers, it used to be that 74% of teachers in Long Beach Unified lived in Long Beach. It's just what you did. You could do that. You could graduate. You could be a 2-teacher family and afford to buy a home in the city of Long Beach.
And my parents were like that. My family were very working class. I was the first in my family to go to college, and they came to Long Beach because it was a very, very affordable place. For decades, it was one of the most affordable cities to live in LA County. And the reason for that is we built a lot of housing in the 40s, the 50s, and the 60s. And then we stopped, but we kept growing our economy. We kept creating jobs. Children grew up and they started their own families, and our housing stock stayed stagnant. And that's a big part of, we haven't even, we talk about here the need to build housing for the people that are never going to be able to afford a shelter without help. But we're not even creating an environment for middle class and working class folks to be able to afford housing, because we're not creating housing for them either. And what that does is it makes this number balloon even more. So it's this vicious cycle with the housing thing that we've got to get a handle on. So after I got involved in the Measure H work and seeing all this horrible data, it didn't take me long to realize, okay, we didn't solve the problem with Measure H as much as I was hoping that was going to be the case. So
it helped a ton with services and Long Beach.
Yes, and we built this incredible homelessness response system that we didn't have before. Housing Works has been a beneficiary dealing with government institutions is always a headache, and you know, getting those grants and dollars is never easy, but we have been able to grow the nonprofit service sector in Los Angeles County.
I will
because of
say
our reach.
one of the ironic things, and then you can go right back to that, is folks who contract with cities, our own city workers who do our homeless outreach, they qualify for affordable housing. Most of them are making $17, $18, $19 an hour. I went back to the city manager and I wanted to know how much our homeless services workers were making per hour. And it's better than they do in some agencies because we're a city and we can economies of scale, so we can provide healthcare at a cheaper rate and all of those things. But I just want to throw in the folks who are working the hardest at this are also one of the ones struggling to be able to stay here to do it.
So shortly after getting involved at the county level, about 10 minutes, perfect. We'll fly through these slides really quickly, but I got involved in the Our Future. Got it. I got involved.
I got a timer on him, I promise.
The Our Future LA Coalition, and we started dreaming up crazy ideas. And it kind of goes back to that point I made before, where our government wasn't designed for this problem. So in a lot of our eyes, in viewing this problem, had the idea of, well, we need to create systems that are designed to solve this problem, and realizing that there's ultimately no public agency anywhere that has an ultimate responsibility around making sure that there's affordable housing for people. So if there isn't an agency that does that, let's create an agency. So we did. We for 3 years, we lobbied Sacramento, realizing we're going to have to get this fixed at the state level to get this created. We got a partner, Cindy Kamlager-Dove, who's now an amazing Congress member, but at the time she was in the California State Senate. We partnered with her. She helped us write a bill, or we helped her write a bill. It was SB 679, and we got it passed and signed by the governor after 3 years. We didn't succeed our first year, but we got it turned into a 2-year bill. Got it passed by both the state Senate, the state assembly. We were supposed to have extra votes in the assembly, and all of a sudden we got a target on our back and we started losing assemblymen. Well, I knew our assemblyman at the time was terrible on housing. So I'm calling his office, getting meetings. I'm being told, don't worry, Andy, if you just get him to not vote, it'll be great. It won't be any problem at all. Just get him to not vote. We'll have plenty of extra votes. Well, we kept losing votes. So I keep harassing his office. I get a meeting with him and his ledge director, and I've got to give him the best pitch I can on this. And so I pitch him, and then the day of the vote in the assembly, he votes yes, and we pass by 1 vote in the assembly. So that was my little miracle story, is I was able to get our assemblyman, who was terrible on these issues in the state, in this whole tenure. He's retired now, but his whole tenure, he was great on a lot of issues. We loved him. He was great on a lot of others. He was terrible on this issue. We got him to vote yes. So anyway, so we got SB 679 passed. We got La Casa created. What is La Casa? La Casa is a Los Angeles County Affordable Housing Solutions Agency. It's a brand new agency, and it's not funded yet, but it's been created. We have a board. Actually, we have with us an alternate board member, because our mayor in the city of Long Beach, Rex Richardson, the city of Long Beach has a designated spot on the board for the mayor of the city, and Megan is his alternate on that board. So we have this new agency, this new board. Now we have to fund it. So these are some of the people that I serve with on Our Future LA Commission, and I stole this PowerPoint presentation from them, but they're amazing people. But these are really the experts on affordable housing creation. So these are some of the guiding principles of what La Casa is. Really the preservation and protection and production of affordable housing, but also we built into La Casa renter protections, because we know we got to do both things. We got to walk and chew gum at the same time. We have to be able to preserve the affordable housing stock we have. We need to create new affordable housing stock, and we need to protect the renters that are the people that are at risk of being pushed into homelessness every day. And so that's what La Casa is designed to do. We got short-term goals and long-term goals here. Invest in the low-income housing tax credit developments. We can pool our money with the federal government program in order to scale up the subsidized affordable housing production environment. So those are some of the goals that we have.
Quicker.
Quicker, okay.
We're almost out of time.
So that leads me to, we haven't funded it yet. So how do we fund this work? And that leads me to the final pitch that I wanted to present to you today. And this is on the November ballot for Los Angeles County. It's Los Angeles County Measure A. And so what Measure A does, I told you we got some things right. We got a lot of things wrong with Measure H. A lot of us in the Our Future LA Coalition have been working on this solution for about 2.5 years now. This is hopefully going to help us get it a little bit more right, or hopefully a lot more right. Measure A is going to, well, we have one big problem in that we put a 10-year sunset on Measure H. And so we're going to lose all that money that has helped us build this response system. We're going to lose that money in a couple of years if we don't replace it. So one idea, we'll just put Measure H back on the ballot again. And a lot of us put on the brakes and said, no, we got to learn, we got to do better. We got to make something more responsible, more flexible, and something that actually goes to the source of the problem. Why are people getting pushed into homelessness on a daily basis in Los Angeles County? And so that's what we're trying to do with Measure A. And so I'll just skip more housing we can afford. We're also targeting more mental health care, more accountability. So I've been a part of the accountability board for Measure H. We do even better with that in Measure A than the program that I've been a part of. There's a lot at stake. So I talked about, we built this massive, amazing infrastructure of agencies like Housing Works, like PATH, like HOPIX, like St. Joseph's. I can just go on and on. You'll actually see a list of a lot of those agencies that have gotten behind our effort. We've made it possible for them to scale up, but we need to do more. But if we lose Measure H and we don't pass Measure A, 50,000 people will lose life-saving housing or services today. So those are 50,000 people in LA County we know today are benefiting from Measure H that will lose that resource and could be back on the street if we don't pass Measure A. So this is just more of what we already talked about, what Measure A will do. I'll just skip to, here's the allocation summary here. So we got 26%. So this is the big missing piece of Measure H. We have no money going to the actual housing, affordable housing solution. Measure A is going to take 26% of the resource and go to that, 60% to homeless services and mental health care. So that helps us put the wraparound services around. Once we get people placed into housing, then they've got the wraparound intensive case management services to go with that housing, because we know when we just put people in housing and don't give them the supportive services, they're at risk of falling back into housing, homelessness again. So we want to prevent that. This is the funding sources. It's only going to affect, affect people on a very low scale. It's a sales tax measure, which isn't the perfect solution, but it was the easiest solution we could get past in this cycle. And then here's a list of all those. These are all the people that have put their heads together behind this solution with the Our Future LA coalition. We have our very own Housing Works right there, HOPIX, PATH, lots of these are the folks on the ground every day, like Housing Works, that are doing this work. And we've all put our heads together to come up with this solution. And so just wanted to make that pitch for you.
And I will say, wrapping back up to what Sherry said about the mission statement and why they ask you to come together to these things. And thank you for considering us to come. They feel like big shoes to fill, and we don't always feel like we're the ones to fill them, but we are honored to be with you today. Like, what are the next steps? What can we do? We know the next 20 days are intense. We know, well, I know that I have a pit in my stomach when I wake up every morning about how this is all going to turn out at the federal level, but also at the local level and at the county level. And I think one of the things that people of good conscience and people of like-minded hearts and good faith can do is to try to have those conversations with your neighbors who will look at Measure A and say, well, you haven't solved it yet. Why would I give you more money? Because that's what we hear, like, you're being irresponsible with the money. But when you look at those allocations, the one thing he didn't point out, 11% of that allocation is for renter protections. It's keeping people housed. It is those lessons learned and talking about that many people have come together to do better with the money that will be earned through this measure. Because those are hard conversations to have, because you're butting up against all of the things that people are seeing on TV, that they're hearing on cable news and all of those things. I have found that the only way that I've changed minds, either about projects in my district or things in my city, is when I've had those conversations with folks on a small group level. Have a group of people over to your house and chat with them about why it's important to you. Tell a story about the reason you're engaged in the work that you're engaged with, because something changed in you that made you here, that led you to be in this space today. And when we share those stories, it's easy to get past the rhetoric of what it is. And so that's what I'm trying to do personally in the next 20 days and beyond. But the work is always, at the end of the day, about people. My job at the end of the day is doing the best I can for 54,000 people, specifically in a city of 500,000. I was telling someone, what do you love about your job? Do you love your job? And my answer is most days I do, in the same way that we all have those days with our jobs. I think some days it's probably harder on him because of the way that we are in life is not typical of my colleagues. How I bring in the world and care for the world and worry about the world is not something I always see in my colleagues. And so I bring things home at night in my head and in my heart that are hard to let go of, things like this. And how could they think that we shouldn't do this? And coming from that deep place of caring is a painful place as an advocate and in the role that I'm in and as leaders. And so I would just ask you to bring people in and tell them your story.
If I just add one last anecdote, we're very proud of all three of our kids, but I thought I'd mention our oldest son, Christian, whose picture is probably on one of these walls in here somewhere, and climbing on a rocket up in Santa Barbara or Montecito.
When we joined the community, our kids were 0. Emma was born into community and baptized at La Casa, and Evan was 2 and Christian was 4.
Well, Christian is now a legislative aide in Washington, D.C. for Congressman Robert Garcia of Long Beach. And it might not surprise you that some of these issues are very important to him and he's very passionate about them as well. He's also, brings a young person's perspective to it, and just a big believer in cities and urbanism and transit, and has a passion for all those things, and housing, and how do we solve some of these entrenched problems. And so we're so super proud of him doing that work at the federal level. And one of the things, another things I've been kind of predicting in my, my crystal ball, if you could call it that, or just, being aware of trends and patterns, is this is becoming a national problem. People want to blame all those Californians, they don't know how to solve problems, but this is becoming a national problem. And I think you hear it in this campaign. And one of the, the first things that you hear Vice President Harris say when she's on the campaign trails, we need to solve the housing crisis, because it's no longer just the California housing crisis. We're often the trends for the nation. And unfortunately that goes good trends and bad trends. And so you hear national leaders and other parts of, because we're also exporting this problem, because as people can't make it here anymore, they're going to go other places. And if those places aren't building enough housing or affordable housing, then they're creating housing crisis in those communities. And that's exactly what's been happening the last few years. So this is becoming a national problem. And so I very much believe that we're going to need something on a large congressional scale at some point. And I hope and pray that the political conditions will allow it sooner than later. But I'm really excited for him to be in the place and space where he is, that he could potentially be involved. And I think we need something like the scale of the Affordable Care Act, or the Infrastructure Reduction Act, the big pill that President Biden passed, that really tackled a lot of our infrastructure needs and the climate change issues, and a lot of things that were wrapped up in that. But I think we need something on the same scale nationally around this issue of affordable housing and homelessness. So I'm hopeful that the election goes well in November on both the local scale and the national scale, so that we can do better on these issues. So that's it. Thank you for having us today. I was originally supposed to be the speaker today, but I think Michelle and I were bouncing ideas around it. And I forget which one of us had the idea. So why don't we bring Megan with us, and we'll get 2 different perspectives up here. So I hope that works.
DNC.
Had good seats.
But anyway, thank you very much. If you hold for a moment, because we'll open it up for
Yes.
Q&A. That's okay. And we also have
I don't
people
know
on.
if either of us have any answers, but
Good point.
we'll try.
Wow. Well, maybe we'll create them here. Just so you know, we will send out your deck to everybody. So if you want to just drill down on those numbers, if you're like Andy,
Sorry,
you will
I
have.
waited too long to get to some of those, but yeah, you can go
Yeah,
through them yourselves.
yeah, I think it's worth it. So we'll just start if anybody has a question.
Hi, thank you both. I too grew up in Long Beach,
Yay.
lived there for
Yay,
many,
Long
many
Beach.
years. But this is actually just a global question. Are there any programs where people are given incentives to house people in their own homes? I know many, just on my block alone, there are 3 empty units. They're just sitting there because they're either used as storage or they're used, once in a while guests will come from out of town, but there's literally 3 beautiful units on my block alone. And I think that's probably all over LA County, or people have extra rooms. Is there any incentive to help people, to help others? Like tax breaks or city?
Not that I've heard of,
I
but
think
we've
I
had
think
those
the expansion of
conversations.
ADUs has been the closest thing to that. Like
Right.
people looking at their properties, what can they create affordable housing stock on their property? But yeah, I haven't seen too much about.
And we've talked
existing
about
housing.
that around like community colleges. We've had residents even say, hey, I'm right by the college and I have an extra room. Is there a program that will match us? And we actually did that with a student from Long Beach City College, but it was really informal. And I think there's not necessarily bandwidth. I think it's a great program for people to create and tackle with their education institutions, either community colleges or universities locally, because there are so many questions, because we all want to do it. And then it's like, well, what about insurance? What about this? And then a city gets into the space of who's in charge of those technical pieces. But I think that's a great either faith-based or community-based solution to, even if a group was to take it on with 3 members and say, let's try it out. Let's see what the lessons learned are after a year. What would we need to put in place? But I don't necessarily see institutions tackling that at this moment. Long Beach does have a pilot program that the city is going to do a no interest loan for 10 people to build ADUs if they use the ADU for voucher housing for 10 years. And then after 10 years, the loan is forgiven. But they have to commit to 10 years. And so that's new. That's something that Long Beach is looking at doing.
Yeah, when we housed a student from Long Beach City College, I was hoping, let's create a model, kind of like what you're talking about, and really wanted the college to take it on as we could be the guinea pigs and, get all the kinks out. And we had a student living, we have a little back house that we had a student living in for a period of time. And we got, far enough up the food chain at the college where the insurance people got involved, and they really didn't want to touch it with a 10-foot pole, and basically said, you can do this, but we don't know anything about it, was kind of the response. So unfortunately, we didn't have the people in the college at that time to say, oh yeah, I don't care about the insurance issues, or we'll do whatever we can to address those issues. Let's figure it out. We didn't have somebody willing to figure it out. So I think that's one of the barriers to doing what you're talking about, unfortunately. But we need people in those positions say, I don't care, it's a problem, we need to figure it out. But that takes some courage sometimes.
First of all, thank you, Megan. Thank you, Andy. My mind's going a million different places, but I'm going to try to narrow it to 2. One is just to respond to what you just asked, Natasha. Yeah. And what you said, Megan, in terms of winning people of good hearts, but not coming out of different perspectives. I know the power of people's stories. It's how you both started in terms of really wanting to do something about this. So I just want to say that Alexandria House has a speakers bureau of folks who are at a point in their lives that they want to share their stories so that this kind of thing can change and it won't happen to other folks, whether it be DV or human trafficking or generations of poverty, whatever it is. So you encourage people to talk to people. And if talking to people would be helpful to have somebody there from a lived experience of being on the streets, we would love to help with that. And the other thing you said, I'd love to get you in touch with Sharon Magliano, who is a woman who did what you did with no tax incentives, but really housed 2 of the families we didn't have space for in her home. And she would be happy to meet with anybody who might be hesitant or, what about insurance, all those questions. So that's important. And every one of you might know where there's an empty apartment unit and you know the owner of that building. We've at Alexandria House have made connections with a number of owners who, because they know there's a support system in place for the folks who are coming out of transitional residence, now sometimes will call us to say, we have a unit, we have a unit. There shouldn't be any empty units. There shouldn't be people on the street, period. Thanks.
And honestly, we just had this conversation, is that the structures can't fix it a lot of the time. And the transition from advocate to being the system is an intentional choice of how you spend your energy. And I'm in the system trying to do the systems change from the system. And I always encourage people who are outside the system to yell harder. Like, I get annoyed with him at the table, but he's not wrong. It just is a point where I can't fix it anymore. And then what do I do? But having people on the outside continue to tell us, you're getting it wrong, you got to do better, is really important. So that group of 100 agencies that are working with Prop A is a pretty impressive group of people, some of whom show up at my council meetings every week to yell at me about something else, but they're in it because they're fighting for it. And I expect that and I welcome it. But I think sometimes we have to solve it, you just open your house sometimes.
Years ago, I was really impressed with a movie short film that came out talking about the military budget, $1 trillion a year, and how we prioritize our concerns. And I think the idea being, we got to spend $1 trillion because, trust me on this, the boogeyman. And we're convinced it's okay to do that. And it got me thinking about Long Beach as an economy. I have no idea what does the city produce and create in terms of wealth, and then the question of how's it allocated, and is that a conversation about what resources Long Beach has financially and where the allocating of those dollars is off?
Absolutely. And why is our budget 70-something% public safety? But what does public safety entail? Does that include just officers, or is that our MET team, which is our mental health response team that works with officers and all of those? Those are questions we look at all the time. And we know that budgets are a moral document, and we get called out frequently about making sure that we're reminded of that. I have a lot of faith in our council, my council colleagues, and our mayor really coming from a place of compassion and wanting to do good work. And Long Beach came from a very conservative city in the 90s, a military town, to a travel and tourism town that really leads the way in some of the more progressive policies, especially around housing. So we know that that's a trend that's happening, but there's always more work to do, for sure.
Yeah, and a quick shout out to our mayor. Megan mentioned her colleagues, and our mayor, he's been a big cheerleader for a lot of the work that I've talked about here in getting Measure A passed, and in the creation of La Casa. He's actually was so excited about La Casa that he really put himself in position to succeed Holly Mitchell. Holly Mitchell was our first chair of the La Casa board, and now he's our current chair of the La Casa board. So he's been a big cheerleader on this work. So
and,
yeah.
And you mentioned the military budget. I'll just say we are fortunate to be friends with our congressman as well on a personal level for a lot of years before he was a congressman. We were just having this conversation about, like, if you cut that 1%, what does that look like in terms of funding national problems? And I think that there is a generation of leadership, newer leadership in Congress, who's willing to look at those questions a lot harder than some of their predecessors, and that there might be ripe for conversations like,
yeah,
what does that look like? How do we, if we build all the housing and we fund all the education, and we did it because we shaved off 1% of something, how are we not doing that? And I think, again, some of that newer generation of leader, urbanists, those types of folks
like
that
Maxwell Frost in Florida.
He is saying are consistently in some of these new classes of Congress, really want to push those questions in ways that I never imagined anybody would.
Yeah, when this freshman class of legislators move up, I think Megan's right. I think if they have the votes behind them, I think there could be, it makes me hopeful that things may not always be as broken as they are right now. Hopefully we'll keep our fingers crossed and say lots of prayers.
So I'm considering going down a rabbit hole, but I need a guide, and I think I'm looking at the guides. And I am wondering what happened to the Sears Tower? At first, there was so much talk about that becoming affordable housing with wraparound services, and I heard there was protesting about it, and now it's crickets. And I'm wondering, where do I go to find out what was the problem and what are possible solutions? Because it's just there, and it's huge, and there's more than enough room for the housing and for the wraparound services and for the parking and for being close to transit. So how do I start going down that rabbit hole to see, is there any place that I can poke around and do something?
Yeah, I haven't been following that one particularly. Have you?
No, and I think part of and again, it goes back to, this is where I know developers often get scapegoated as, developers who are doing these things. We rely on developers to build affordable housing because the governments aren't building housing right now. Somebody has to do it. So we know that there are really well-intentioned developers who are out there working hard. Someone's gonna have to take a risk on that. I know even within the city of Long Beach, we have, buildings that don't have people in them anymore because they're all working from home now. The cost to transition something into housing is really much more expensive than they thought. And so I don't think government agencies are looking to take that on, especially in something that is a bigger structure. But I would imagine that there's got to be conversations within development spaces in LA. Andy might be able to connect you with some of his coalition partners who might know something specific.
Yeah, I'll put my head on that. But yeah, that really is a big problem, is we were really shifted. And it kind of goes back to what I was saying before, where I think we need, a massive like Affordable Care Act type solution at the federal level, because we got out of the public housing business. That's part of the problem, is government isn't involved in housing. I mean, they're indirectly involved in housing, and they're having to do more of that, especially like around building shelters and interim housing and those types of solutions, because it's their responsibility to do and scale that up for the immediate need. But like the long-term permanent housing, cities have never done that work and never done that work well. We used to have, HUD that built a lot of public housing, and we moved away from that as a country during my pretty much my whole lifetime. We've been shifting away from that, from building public housing. But I think we need to, and there's a lot of creative ideas around housing trusts and community land banks, and there's a lot of creative ideas out there. And but it takes big dollars focused in the right direction to be able to do that, to maybe acquire, one of those land banks acquiring Sears Tower. But it's this problem of a lot of private ownership that and government just doesn't have the resources to come in and buy up and create housing themselves. They were never designed to do that. So it's going back to, we're building the airplane while it's up in the air, but it gets really complicated really fast.
And I think this is where it goes back to local government as well, is you have to have folks willing, I've said it on more than one occasion, and everybody always tells me to shush. I said, at the end of the day, if I only have one term in office, but we are able to manage to build some affordable housing and to get some solutions in place, then that's worth it to me. But you need to have local leaders who are willing to say yes. I mean, you had the city, city of Norwalk that just recently said that they want a moratorium on any more shelter beds. Like, we're in the middle of a crisis. What are you saying? So those really smaller cities need the encouragement, and they need to continue to elect folks who are willing to be part of the solution, even though there's political pushback for it. It's not an easy space to be in if you have a trajectory in mind of where you want to go. So I would just encourage you to talk with your really local folks and make sure your own city councils and adjacent city councils are willing to say yes if a developer comes in and says, I want to build affordable housing, that they're going to have an easy time in their city to do it, because a lot of cities aren't super friendly for it.
And that was
There's another question.
another really exciting thing about La Casa that I didn't really get into, is we have 88 cities in Los Angeles County. It's easy to lose track of that, like Norwalk being one of them, Long Beach being one of them. We think about city of LA, and we know what they do and don't do, but there's all these 87 other cities in the county, and some of them have very, very limited capacity to solve these problems. And La Casa, being a county-wide regional agency, one of the ideas was La Casa can help them do more than they're doing now around these solutions.
Hi,
Hi.
I'm Elsa.
Hi, Elsa.
I wanted to ask, this Sunday, I was on a Zoom call with a bunch of voting enthusiasts. And they were going over the different ballot issues because, doing your ballot in California is so complicated. And I was just wondering if you could speak a little bit on Prop 33. I personally live in a rent stabilized apartment, and I know I'm very dependent on the rent control and rent stabilization staying in place. And there's so many conflicting views on Prop 33. And in particular, I was really shocked with one of my fellow voting enthusiasts, the negative pushback on it. And it kind of came to mind when you were talking about the yard signs that say save democracy, and then people not necessarily voting in the best interest of that.
Yeah. Do you want to do that?
I don't want to take this one because I'll just be very honest with you. That's a highly political, 33 and 34 are highly political, and they have a long political history of the people who are backing those. And that is one of the complications of the proposition system in California is if you're not super clear on who's funding it and why they're funding it, that the person funding Prop 33 has a long history in the industry, which isn't always viewed favorably. So I do not have an official position on Prop 33 and 4, and I actually have my ballot out. I got to do my research, but.
And I guess I can speak on the rent control issue or that specific issue. And I haven't really dove into, I've been so focused on Measure A, but it is a solution. But I think a problem a lot of people have is if you know you need to do 50 things, and we're going to vote yes on the one thing, and the success of the one thing is dependent on the 49 other things also happening. And what if those things don't happen? So it's just kind of a simple way that you're not going to solve the housing crisis with Prop 33. I think that's the end. Is this going to help? It's going to help, people are definitely going to, they're going to be beneficiaries of it, but it's going to, when you look at the scale of the problem and the need and the folks that it's going to help, without all those 49 other things happening simultaneously, then it's not a solution. So I think that's where people get into the economics of it, that it's good for some, but not for the greater good necessarily. So that's probably why I'll probably vote no against it, because I want a more comprehensive solution. And I see Measure A as being a much more comprehensive solution that also puts dollars behind a solution and isn't going to make, it's the law of unintended consequences. When you create a very narrow solution for a very complex problem, there's going to be a lot of negative consequences that come from that potentially.
And that propositions can then only be changed by another proposition. And then
it's in the state constitution.
Then it's in a state constitution. So that's why Prop 3, we're pushing to support Prop 3 to eliminate the language that bans same-sex marriage in the state. That's the old remnant of Prop 8 that still sits in our constitution. So we have to do another referendum in Prop 3 to remove that language. So if any proposition passes and 3 or 4 years later, you realize there are some real unintended consequences, the only way to change that is a statewide vote, which becomes super expensive. And can somebody fund it, especially if the people who are most impacted don't have a lot of power or money? So I think that's how how I choose to weigh propositions of, we need to look at some of the unintended consequences and try and guess what they might be. Yeah. Or if not, we can go and you can have dessert.
Hi, thanks so much. I'm Troy. So NIMBYism seems to be baked into our DNA, I guess, as humans. And
I say it's the last bipartisan issue.
Right. Yet it sort of seems like there's NIMBYism and there's NIMBYism. It's not as if we're talking about affordable housing. It's not as if we're asking people to accept coming into their neighborhood. It's not as if we're, not to demonize prisons, but a prison or a factory. So my question is, the Sisyphean sort of task of trying to subvert maybe human nature about, that NIMBYism really is an expression of. What lessons or strategies can you take from efforts, whether environmental or what have you, some of the examples I just suggested, as an argumentative strategy to convince people and, your neighbors and those with the signs in the yards, et cetera, that are otherwise kind of on the right side of things, that it's not that bad. These are people coming into your neighborhood, right? They're people. I'm just curious what strategies you've experimented with.
I think one voice that's been exceptionally impactful for me are young people. So having been a school board member for 8 years and raised 3 kids into young adulthood somewhat successfully, depending on the day, the decisions, and I was just with this little group of Weeblos who are 4th grade Boy Scouts, by the way, Weeblos, on Sunday, and they ask the question of what's the most, what do you like to do the best? I said, I like doing this because being with 4th graders, just like being on the school board, reminds me that I am making decisions today that impact them. So kindergartners this year, frighteningly enough, I think are the class of 2038. And so if a kindergarten kid's gonna graduate at 2038, what city have I helped create for them? And right now, the city that has been created for my kids who are in their 20s is that they can't afford to live in the city they grew up in. They can't definitely afford to grow up in the neighbors, buy or rent in the neighborhood they grew up in. And so here are kids who, trying to find their way in life, who would like to stay in the community that they love, that raised them, that is important to them, who are looking around and there's no space for them. And so I've used that with older folks. Like, you want your grandkids to be able to live here, right? You don't want them to move out of state. We have to create spaces for them to live because you're still living in your single family home that has 4 bedrooms. So that conversation about, for people who have younger people in their lives, this is a huge issue for them. If you talk to college kids, high school kids are very environmentally focused because they do a lot of studying around it. But for folks who are about to emerge into a community or who are in a community that they love and are living in their car, those are important conversations. I actually had a resident ask me, because we have part of Long Beach City College in our district, and had heard that Long Beach City College was doing safe parking for some of their students, providing them with Wi-Fi and showers in the parking structure where it was safe, because they have this percentage of students living in their cars of multiple ages. They're not just teenagers, they could be young adults. And they have that at one campus, and this resident was concerned it was going to be coming to our campus. I said, oh, I don't believe that they have a safe parking site, but it's designated, there's security for them and there's showers and they provide all the things that they need. And well, the unintended consequences, I said, well, it's better than them living in their car in front of your house. Like, some of it is just that simple, of your concern that people are living there. Well, let's get them a place to live. You don't want them living on the street in their car outside, oh, Orange Avenue, there's 3 people living in their cars. Okay, but you don't want the safe parking to happen either. We talk a lot about you can't be an enemy, you can't hate the solution and the problem. Like, you got to pick which one you hate more. If you hate the problem more, then you get on board with solutions that are uncomfortable. But if you hate the solutions, then you got to be okay, living with yourself that folks are sleeping on the street. So
But it's really hard work. Like Megan touched on the project that I'm confident. I think that development is going to happen, but it's going to take, we're probably going to have at least 3 or 4 community meetings between now and when that project breaks ground. And there are going to be people showing up to that meeting with the intention of killing that development. And years ago, they would have succeeded. I think we're finally at a place now where they won't be successful because of the changes in state law, the changes. We can't deny that those efforts are part of a big part of the solution, or a big part of the problem. We can't deny that anymore. And so I think we're going to succeed in getting that development. But it's hard work. Like, all those agencies and grassroots organizations, they're out there fighting that fight every day. But it just, to get every little thing done, it takes a massive movement behind it. And so unfortunately, there's no shortcuts to that yet. And so I think that goes to what we can all do. We can show up at those meetings when there's a solution being proposed where we live, or even somewhere nowhere near you live. Show up and support the people in that community that are advocating for it, and be a voice behind them and clap for them instead of the 100 NIMBYs clapping for the person. And that you're going to change the character of my neighborhood that I invested in all these years ago. I've been a homeowner here since 1982, and you can't do this to my neighborhood. Be the people clapping for the people, saying, Yeah, but you're not creating opportunities for my generation. And what about the people younger than me and that don't have the opportunity? I cheer for them. And so those are the things, because that all makes a difference. If the people, it's the people that show up that make the difference. And so
right
that's
now,
what we
I would
can
say
do.
collectively on many issues, the people who are showing up are really cranky. They're really frustrated. And so when we had a community meeting like that, you know, the 5 or 6 people who were brave enough to stand up in 300 people and say, I support this, make the difference. And so that goes back to if you have the ability, the skills, the time, and the energy to engage with your local folks who are doing the work, let them know you support those kinds of projects. Because I tell you, we don't hear it very often. It is very welcome to be able to do. And for every email I get in support of something, I'll get 15 opposed. But when I get to say, I had 35 people send me support letters for this, is a powerful thing to take to my city manager, is a powerful thing to take to my colleagues. And I am guilty of wanting to kind of ignore the negative and let them just be, but also understanding that within the systems, if you have the ability to set up a form, even if it's a form letter, but 3 sentences of, I live in the neighborhood around the corner and I 100% support this, and what, 2 of my neighbors do, those kinds of things, I think, empower leaders to continue to move on. Because I think a lot of folks can give up in the negativity. Sometimes it's just too hard.
Can I slightly answer this question too?
Yeah.
So in every single social issue, there's a not in my backyard. So it's not only housing. So when the Department of Juvenile Justice, for instance, closed down, then they reallocated the youth to the 53 counties throughout California. And in Los Angeles, we had to build secure youth track facilities. And every single supervisorial district had a hearing, and it was on Zoom. And I mean, the vitriol of every single community from Calabasas, Malibu, Long Beach, I mean, every single person was like, not in my backyard. We don't want to have these youth who have been convicted of violent crime. I mean, it was horrible listening to what our neighbors and fellow, voters have to say. I mean, a lot of it was just ignorant. A lot of it was just hateful. But I think the biggest thing is what you had suggested, is to have people come to your meetings that have lived experience, that have been a success story. Because many people, like just a couple of years ago, it was 70,000 people in Los Angeles County that were homeless. Some of these people are geniuses. They have PhDs. They are professors. They are of all different walks of life of homeless people. And if you can have some people from Alexandria House or other to come to your meetings to demonstrate how they have, because that's the only way, is that you have to humanize it. And through stories or documentaries, that's what people listen to and that's what they connect to. Because if you just throw out a bunch of stats, that's harder. But if you have a person to person, so maybe we can get a lot of people to come to and then second, Andy, I think it is, right?
Yeah.
What your wife said, or you said you just have to do it. I'm with you. So I would ignore all of that because it takes a lot. People are just going to complain about anything and everything, and you just have to ignore that and move forward. Because if you have this amazing community and you already bought the property and it is like in a desirable with schools and blah, 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 you just have to move forward and ignore it. And you will have the backing for it. It's just sometimes maybe people won't come forward to say it, but you will have it. It is there.
And I think we're always having to remind ourselves, because the opposition can be so loud and noisy that we really, I think, know at the end of the day that the majority is behind a lot of the things that we want to see happen. And so we have to remind ourselves of that. As much as we're listening to the people that show up, they're not always representative of our greater community. And we have to remind ourselves of that.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for having us.
So thank you, because you gave us
Hey,
the
you.
why. And now we have to do the what. We have to vote, we have to talk, we have to engage. It's uncomfortable. It's uncomfortable, and we can do it. And also to Judy and the Speakers Bureau, we will reach out to me. I'll connect you with Judy. They have an amazing Speakers Bureau to really put faces and stories. Thank you for bringing that up, Natasha. Faces and stories to the numbers. Thanks again to Megan and Andy for all that you're doing. A few announcements. Oh, look at your table. There are some forms there. If you're interested in our commissions, please fill that out. We'll collect them. If you're interested in suggesting topics or speakers, there's a form for that too. And more importantly, there's our upcoming events. So please have a look at this. Our next Lunch and Learn will be with the executive director of the Carita Arts Center. That's going to be opening in March. You can see billboard for that on Western Boulevard. So that will be exciting. We're going to have a holiday boutique here the first Friday in December. So we're going to be having women who've started their own businesses and really try to support small and women-owned businesses. And then there will be a Lenten retreat in December with our friends at First Congregational Church. And all the details are on the handout, but also will be on our website. Please take one of the beautiful Carita Kent bookmarks at the table there. And there's a QR code that will take you to our website to find out all that information. And there will be a survey. Oh, I wanted to mention, we will send you a survey. We'll also send you a link so that you can rewatch this program, but also my dear friend Natasha Kamashta was our speaker last month. She's a public defender, and her talk will also be available. So we'll send the link to that. You won't have to miss everything. I want to thank all of our viewers on Zoom. Thank you for joining us, and I thank you for your time also. And I think that's it. So anyway, thank you, everybody. I love seeing new faces and all the friendly faces. Have a great day.